There was this amazing moment yesterday, just as the White House was set to announce that Syria had crossed a red line by using chemical weapons in the fight against its own people, and that the decision had been made to supply arms support to the rebels. And Arizona's Republican Senator John McCain took to the floor not only to step all over the White House's message, but to ratchet up the rhetoric.
The president also will announce that we will be assisting the Syrian rebels in Syria by providing them with weapons and other assistance. But the President of the United States had better understand that just supplying weapons is not going to change the equation on the ground of the balance of power. Just to provide additional weapons to the Syrian National Army is not enough.
McCain came out with this before the official White House announcement. It was his own little preemptive strike in the next phase of the Syria debate. Moments later, the escalating debate got even more amazing when McCain's Democratic colleague, Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, sent out this tweet, quote, "Was on the Senate floor to hear Obama spokesman John McCain announce military aid for Syrian rebels. Hashtag strange world." A few hours later, Senator Murphy then released what I thought was a very thoughtful and measured response to this drumbeat for intervention, saying, "Last week I expressed deep reservations about committing U.S. military resources to support these opposition forces, which remain dangerously splintered and hold demonstrable ties to terrorist organizations. I urge the president to exercise restraint and to consult closely with Congress before undertaking any course of action to commit American military resources to Syrian opposition forces." Joining me now is Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, and a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's been critical of the president's decision to commit U.S. military resources to support the opposition forces in Syria. Senator, thank you for joining me. I guess my first question for you was, what was your reaction to yesterday's announcement from the White House?
Well, I thought I had missed something when I heard Senator McCain announce it on the Senate floor, but when I scurried back to my office, I found that it was true. Listen, I understand that the president is in a very difficult position here. There is, frankly, no good solution. To allow this murder to continue is unacceptable, but I would argue that we could potentially make the situation worse, not better, by committing American arms. First of all, this is not a simple proposition. The Syrian opposition is badly splintered, and if you give them relatively low-level arms, then it's not going to be enough to overcome the momentum that Bashar al-Assad has. But if you give them high-level, more potent arms, then the risk that they get into the hands of Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamists is great, and that has security consequences to us down the road. The bigger question is, what if we do win? And what if this new government is formed that has U.S. backing? How long do we have to stay? Do we have to get involved in nation building? And essentially, are we just going to then be funding one side of a civil war? These things play out one way. There's a revolution, and then there normally is a civil war, and we've seen it before. I want us to learn from history before we jump into this.
Senator, let me ask you this. How is this shaking out in the U.S. Senate and in the U.S. Congress? Here's what I've heard. I've heard John McCain, Lindsey Graham, some of your Democratic colleagues quite strongly calling for an increased U.S. role. I've heard some members of the Republican Party, folks like Rand Paul, who have been very skeptical. I have not heard a huge amount of Democratic voices in the Senate and the House trying to throw up the yellow light on this whole thing. Where is that voice in Congress right now?
Well, all we've had so far is a vote of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and it was a surprisingly large margin.
Yes.
It was a 15-3 majority in favor of giving the president the power to arm the rebels. There were 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, Tom Udall, myself, and Rand Paul, who voted against it. I was surprised by the margin of that vote because there's another alternative here. We can continue providing humanitarian aid. We can place a priority on trying to make sure that this conflict doesn't spiral outside of Syria rather than putting arms on the ground. And so I think you are now going to hopefully see some members of both sides of the aisle step up and say, whoa, listen, we need to be a little bit more careful about this because Syria is more complicated in a lot of ways than Iraq or Afghanistan were. And this is a proxy war times 10. It's a proxy war with Russia, with Iran, with the Kurds, with the Sunnis, with the Shias. This is not something you come in and out of in 6 months or a year. This is perhaps a decade. And we could lose a lot in terms of both treasure and reputation if we get this wrong.
Let me ask you this question. there is talk about a no-fly zone. Senator John McCain has called for a no-fly zone. The Wall Street Journal reporting on Thursday that U.S. officials also told the Wall Street Journal the U.S. military proposal for arming the rebels calls for a limited no-fly zone inside Syria. Today, Ben Rhodes, national security spokesperson for the White House, downplayed that idea. Are you worried that we are headed towards an inevitable escalation towards a no-fly zone if we take this first incremental step of arming the rebels and it, quote, doesn't work because it doesn't change the balance of power?
Well, there's the problem. I mean, given the fact that we have waited this long, you can't just hand the rebels a bunch of automatic weapons and expect that you're going to change the balance. McCain is right that you have to do much more than that. But a no-fly zone in Syria is fundamentally different than providing air support in Libya. You were talking about sophisticated Russian-built air defense systems that are going to take a lot of American firepower to take down in order to allow for our planes to fly overhead in the first place. This is a very complicated, very expensive endeavor. And I am worried, A, at the cost to Americans in terms of money and lives to a no-fly zone, but then to the extent that we have to put very powerful arms on the ground to change the balance of power, and Jabhat al-Nusra and al-Qaeda are integrally involved in the opposition, how do we make sure that the wrong people don't get hands on those very powerful weapons?
Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who is also the catcher in last night's Democrat-Republican drubbing of the Republicans, 22-0. I saw a great action shot of you behind the plate. Congratulations on that. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
What do you